The city of Leora was waking up to another ordinary morning. Sunlight streamed over narrow streets, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the small bakery at the corner of Maple Street. Marlowe, the owner, wiped his hands on his apron as he opened the door, expecting the usual crowd of workers, children, and city folk looking for breakfast. But today, like every morning for the past few weeks, something unusual waited outside. A dragon stood quietly near the door. It was small, about the size of a large dog, but no one could mistake it for anything ordinary. Its scales shone like gold in the early sunlight, and a thin curl of smoke rose from its nostrils. The dragon did not roar or move aggressively. It simply stood there watching the bakery, its amber eyes calm and focused. Children passing by gasped and pointed, whispering excitedly to each other. "A real dragon," they said. Adults crossed the street quickly, unwilling to come near. Even the morning birds seemed to keep their distance, as if the dragon's presence changed the city itself. Marlowe froze, unsure of what to do. He had always dreamed of adventure, but never imagined a dragon appearing at his doorstep. He was nervous, thinking it might burn the bakery or eat his bread. But as he watched, the dragon did not move toward the door, nor did it touch the bread sitting in the window. It only sniffed the air, tilting its head as if enjoying the smell of flour, yeast, and warm loaves. For several mornings, Marlowe hid behind the counter, trying to see why the dragon came. He expected it to attack or steal something. But it never did. Each day it waited outside, patient and silent, as if it had a reason no one could understand. The city began to talk about the dragon. Some called it dangerous. Others said it was magical. Children named it Golden Smell, because it seemed to love the smell of bread more than anything else. One morning Marlowe decided to test something. He broke a small piece of bread and tossed it near the dragon. It sniffed the bread carefully and then looked at Marlowe. Its amber eyes were not hungry eyes, they were thoughtful, almost curious. Then it turned away, ignoring the bread completely. Marlowe blinked in surprise. The dragon did not come for food. It had been coming for the smell of fresh bread. And something else. Marlowe could feel it. The dragon was not just a creature of the wild. It was intelligent, aware, and patient. Marlowe thought about what this could mean. He had heard stories of dragons in old books and fairy tales, but those dragons were fierce, destructive, and dangerous. This one was different. It was calm and careful. It had no wings yet that he could see, and its claws were small but sharp. He realized the dragon must have chosen him somehow. Why his bakery? Why every morning? The questions circled in his mind while he kneaded dough, trying to focus on the work he loved. Curiosity won over fear. Marlowe began leaving small amounts of bread near the door, not to feed the dragon but to observe it. He watched as it came closer, sniffing each loaf carefully, sometimes curling its head against the warm air rising from the oven. It made small, happy noises, a soft hiss or rumble, that reminded him of a cat purring. Sometimes, it would tilt its head toward him as if it understood him, even though they had never spoken. One morning, a strong wind blew through the streets, rattling doors and windows. People hurried along the sidewalks, holding onto hats and coats. Marlowe opened his door and froze. The dragon was there, standing firm against the wind, scales glinting as the sun broke through clouds. It did not move. It waited. Marlowe felt a strange warmth in his chest. The dragon was not afraid. It had trust in him, or perhaps in the bakery itself. The city began noticing patterns. The dragon was always outside Marlowe's bakery first thing in the morning, waiting. It did not follow anyone home, and it did not go near other shops. People whispered, wondering if the dragon had a message or mission. Merchants looked concerned, but the dragon never caused harm. Instead, it gave the city a strange sense of wonder. Children began coming early, hoping to see the dragon. They were never disappointed. Sometimes it let them touch its scales gently, letting them feel warmth and softness instead of fire and fear. Marlowe's mornings became different too. He started baking earlier just so the dragon could smell the bread fresh from the oven. He talked quietly to the dragon while kneading dough, telling it about his day, his worries, and the little joys he found in baking. The dragon listened, tilting its head, sometimes pressing a claw softly against the wooden floor as if answering him. It was a silent companionship, but it was strong. One day a city guard appeared. He stopped and stared at the dragon. "This is dangerous," he said to Marlowe. "Dragons do not belong near humans." Marlowe hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's not dangerous," he said finally. "It just waits. It likes the smell of bread." The guard shook his head and left, muttering about rules and danger. Marlowe knew it would not be easy. People might not understand, but he also realized that the dragon had chosen him, and he could not turn it away. Weeks passed and the dragon's routine never changed. It waited patiently every morning, sometimes tilting its head toward Marlowe, sometimes closing its eyes in bliss as the warm smell of bread filled the air. Marlowe began to feel something new: hope. Life had felt small and repetitive before, but the dragon's presence reminded him that there were wonders beyond the ordinary. The dragon did not demand anything. It did not roar or chase. It only waited, quietly, teaching Marlowe something he could not yet name: patience, respect, and the magic of simple acts. Marlowe smiled one morning as he looked at the dragon. The city bustled around them, but for a moment, it was just the two of them, the baker and the dragon. Neither spoke and neither needed to. They understood each other. And as Marlowe carried a fresh loaf to the window, he knew the mornings would never be the same again. Something extraordinary had chosen his small bakery, and he was ready to welcome it, every day. Days passed and the dragon continued its quiet morning visits. Marlowe had begun to understand its routine. It did not speak, of course, but its eyes, soft and bright, seemed full of questions and curiosity. Marlowe could feel that the dragon was not just an animal, it was intelligent, thoughtful, and patient. Every morning, as he baked, he would glance at it standing outside, and every morning, the dragon would tilt its head toward him as if acknowledging his presence. One rainy morning, the streets of Leora were nearly empty. People hurried along, huddled under umbrellas, and the wind rattled the bakery door. Marlowe looked outside and gasped. The dragon was there, soaked but calm. Its scales glistened with rain, and its eyes seemed almost sad. Marlowe felt a pang of concern. He had never invited the dragon inside. He had been afraid it might damage the bakery or hurt him by accident. But today he could not leave it standing in the cold. "Come in," he whispered, stepping aside. The dragon paused, then slowly entered, shaking its wet tail on the floor and sending droplets across the wooden planks. Marlowe hurried to mop them up, but the dragon did not seem careless or destructive. It moved carefully, sniffing the warm air, touching the ovens with its snout, and curling beside the counter. Marlowe realized this was the first time he had seen the dragon so close, and he felt a strange mixture of fear and joy. For the first time, Marlowe spoke freely to it. "You like the smell of bread, don't you?" he said, kneading dough while the dragon watched. The creature tilted its head and gave a soft hiss, almost like a laugh. Marlowe laughed too, nervous and delighted. He set small pieces of dough on the floor for the dragon to sniff, watching its eyes widen as the aroma filled its senses. The dragon did not eat them, but it pressed its nose against the warm pieces, breathing in deeply. Over the next week, Marlowe experimented. He began talking while baking, telling the dragon about his life. He spoke of his small childhood in the city, of his love for baking, and of the long days spent working alone. He told the dragon about the people who came to his shop, the children who ran laughing through the streets, and the quiet moments that made him happy. The dragon listened silently, sitting near the counter, sometimes nudging a loaf of bread gently with its snout as if joining the conversation. Marlowe noticed that the dragon responded to his emotions. When he spoke happily, it would sway slightly, almost like a nod. When he worried or spoke of fear, it would lower its head and press its warm nose against his hand. Marlowe realized he was forming a bond unlike anything he had ever known. The city might fear dragons, but he had discovered one that was kind, patient, and intelligent. It did not demand or threaten. It simply existed, and that was enough to make life feel extraordinary. He began leaving small treats on the floor, not as food but as trust. The dragon accepted them carefully, sniffing before gently nudging them aside. Sometimes it would press a claw lightly against Marlowe's arm, and he could feel the warmth of its scales. He began to name it silently in his mind. Aurum, he thought, meaning gold because of its shimmering scales. The name seemed to suit it perfectly. The dragon did not need words, but Marlowe felt that it understood the care and affection behind the gesture. The children of Leora began noticing changes in Marlowe. He seemed happier, more patient, and lighter in spirit. He smiled more as he worked, whistled while kneading dough, and sometimes hummed softly. He kept the secret of Aurum, but the bond gave him energy. Even when the bakery was quiet and the city streets empty, Marlowe no longer felt alone. The dragon's presence was comforting, like a warm fire on a cold morning. One afternoon, while the city slept under a gentle drizzle, Marlowe experimented further. He baked a special loaf with honey and herbs, curious how Aurum would react. When he set it near the counter, the dragon approached slowly. It sniffed deeply, eyes wide and alert, then leaned gently against Marlowe's side. Marlowe laughed softly, amazed. The dragon was not only intelligent, it seemed to understand him in ways he could not explain. He began to talk more, telling it stories about other cities, other people, and the wonders he dreamed of seeing. Orem listened, patient and still, as if remembering every word. The city was beginning to notice Orem's gentle nature. Some curious people would peek into the bakery, whispering about the dragon, but Orem never reacted with aggression. Marlowe realized that his secret friendship was growing stronger each day. The dragon was learning about humans and he was learning about dragons. He felt a new kind of hope. If one creature could understand kindness and patience, perhaps the city could too. Marlowe began to realize something deeper. Orem did not come just for the bread. It came for the comfort, the trust, and the quiet companionship. The dragon had chosen him, and in return he chose to care for it. Their mornings together became a ritual of understanding. Marlowe would knead dough, hum softly, and share stories, while Orem sat nearby, breathing in the warmth of the bakery and the simple smell of freshly baked bread. Even the city's children began to change. They watched from the windows, noticing the calm and gentle bond between man and dragon. Some dared to approach, timidly offering small toys or crumbs of bread. Orem accepted them with care, never harming, always gentle. It seemed to teach the children patience and respect without words, showing them that not all dragons were to be feared. By the end of the week, Marlowe and Orem had established a quiet routine. Each morning, the dragon would wait outside until Marlowe opened the door. Then it would enter slowly, moving carefully around the bakery, sniffing the air and leaning close to him as he worked. Marlowe would talk, laugh, and share small moments of life. The city around them continued in its ordinary rush, but inside the bakery, something extraordinary had taken root. A secret friendship that required no words, only patience, trust, and kindness. Marlowe often thought about what the future might hold. The city might not understand, and the dragon could not explain itself to anyone else. Yet he knew this bond was special. It was a quiet miracle in the middle of the busy streets. The mornings were no longer ordinary. The smell of bread was no longer just food. It was a bridge between human and dragon, a connection that made the world feel a little wider, a little brighter, and full of possibility. And as the sun rose each day, Marlowe would look at Orem, kneading his dough and smiling, knowing that sometimes, the most extraordinary friendships were born in silence, with trust and the simple joy of being together. The mornings in Leora had become special. Marlowe and Orem, the golden dragon, shared quiet routines. Orem waited outside the bakery and Marlowe baked fresh bread, telling stories softly while kneading dough. But one morning something felt different. A heavy sound echoed through the streets, a distant rumble, not from the city's traffic or carts, but from something larger. Marlowe paused, glancing out the window. Orem stiffened, its ears twitching, and its eyes focused on the approaching sound. A patrol of city guards appeared first, their armor shining in the sunlight. They walked with purpose, stopping in front of the bakery. Marlowe's heart sank. He had hoped the city would leave them alone, that no one would question the strange friendship he had nurtured. But it seemed the city had noticed Orem after all. One of the guards, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward. "Bakery owner," he called. "A dragon in the city is dangerous. You are ordered to remove it immediately." His voice was loud and sharp, echoing down the street. Children scattered behind corners and adults stopped to watch. Orem remained calm, standing silently by the door, but Marlowe could feel the tension in its body. Its tail twitched slightly, and the smoke from its nostrils curled faster. Marlowe swallowed hard. "It is not dangerous," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It doesn't hurt anyone. Just waits. It likes the smell of bread." The guard shook his head. "Rules are rules. A dragon cannot stay in a human city. It must be captured." Marlowe's stomach dropped. He did not want to lose Orem, but he also knew the guards were serious. They carried nets, ropes, and cages, and even though Orem was small, Marlowe feared the consequences if the dragon resisted. That night, Marlowe closed the bakery early. The streets were empty, but the tension hung like a heavy fog. Orem stayed close to the counter, eyes alert, tail curling around the floor. Marlowe watched it, unsure what to do. He could not let the city take it away. He could not imagine life without his friend. Yet he also knew that defending Orem could bring danger, not just to the dragon but to the bakery and himself. He thought about the first days Orem had appeared. How it had waited patiently, never demanding, never stealing. How it had taught him quiet patience and a strange joy in simple routines. And now the city wanted to destroy that peace. He placed a hand on Orem's soft scales. "We'll find a way," he whispered. The dragon looked at him, eyes reflecting understanding and trust, as if saying, "I know." The next morning the patrol returned. This time more guards had joined, and the city streets were filled with curious onlookers. Children peered from windows and merchants stopped their work. Marlowe felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He opened the bakery door slowly, standing between Orem and the patrol. The dragon's small form moved close to him, a protective presence more powerful than any weapon. The lead guard stepped forward. "Step aside. The dragon belongs to the city now. You will not resist." Marlowe clenched his fists. He thought of all the mornings he had shared with Orem, the quiet friendship, the soft stories, the trust that had grown between them. He could not step aside. "No," he said firmly. "This dragon is not a threat. It is my friend. You cannot take it." The guard's eyes narrowed. "We have our orders," he said. "You will obey." Orem shifted slightly, curling closer to Marlowe. It hissed softly but not in anger. Marlowe realized the dragon trusted him to make the right choice. He could see it in Orem's eyes. It was patient, intelligent, and aware. It was waiting to see what he would do. Marlowe knew that if he acted with fear, the dragon might sense it. He needed courage. "Listen to me," Marlowe said, raising his voice so the crowd could hear. "This dragon does not want to fight. It has never harmed anyone. It comes here only for the smell of bread and for the quiet moments we share. It is patient, kind, and intelligent. You are wrong to think it is dangerous." The guards murmured among themselves. The children watching from windows gasped. Orem shifted slightly, pressing its head against Marlowe's leg, reinforcing his words with silent trust. The lead guard looked uncertain. This is unusual," he muttered. "We have never seen a dragon behave like this." Marlowe nodded. "You will not understand unless you see it for yourself. It is not a weapon. It is a being capable of learning, feeling, and choosing. Please do not force it into fear or anger. That is when dragons become dangerous." There was silence. The city held its breath. Orem lifted its head, gazing around calmly, not threatening anyone, only waiting. Marlowe realized that in this moment, the dragon was teaching the city something important. Strength was not shown through claws or fire. Intelligence was not proven by fear or rules. Trust, patience, and understanding were more powerful than any weapon. The guard lowered his net slightly, his expression softening. "Perhaps we underestimated it," he said quietly. The other guards nodded. They had expected a monster, but Orem's calm presence was unlike anything they had ever faced. Marlowe felt a surge of relief. He had faced the threat, not with force but with words, patience, and a quiet courage that only came from care and friendship. The patrol left slowly, casting curious glances back at the bakery, and the crowd began to disperse. The children waved to Orem, who flicked its tail in acknowledgement. Marlowe closed the door slowly, breathing deeply. He turned to Orem, smiling. "We did it," he said. Orem nudged his hand gently, a small affirmation, and settled beside him. Marlowe realized something powerful that day. The dragon had not just been his friend. It had taught him courage, patience, and how to face fear without anger. It had reminded him that understanding and care were stronger than rules or weapons. And as he prepared the next batch of bread, he felt a deep certainty. Whatever challenges came next, he and Orem would face them together, not as human and dragon, but as friends who trusted each other completely. From that day on, Marlowe knew the city's perception could change, and it had begun. The threat of the patrol had been real, but the true lesson was more than survival. It was the quiet, patient power of trust and friendship, a power that even a city full of rules could not ignore. The city had calmed, but Marlowe could feel the tension in the air. Word of Orem, the golden dragon, had spread quietly through the streets. Some people whispered, calling it dangerous, while others watched with curiosity. Marlowe knew that sooner or later, someone would return, expecting the dragon to be captured. He had hoped it would not happen, but he also knew he could not hide forever. That morning, the dragon waited outside as usual, its scales glowing softly in the early sunlight. Marlowe carried a fresh loaf to the window, and Orem sniffed the warm bread, closing its eyes in quiet contentment. It had become a ritual for both of them, a moment of calm in a busy city, where trust and friendship grew stronger every day. But today Marlowe sensed that this calm might be broken. Before the streets filled with children and merchants, a group of city officials arrived. They were not ordinary guards. They wore formal uniforms and carried strange devices, tools meant to restrain or harm if necessary. Their leader, a tall woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Bakery owner," she said firmly, "we have orders from the council. That dragon must leave the city immediately." Marlowe's stomach sank. He had hoped for understanding, but now he realized the challenge was greater than he had imagined. Marlowe looked at Orem. The dragon's head tilted slightly as if sensing the coming choice. It had been patient for weeks, but it was also aware of danger. Marlowe took a deep breath. He could step aside and let the officials capture the dragon. He could protect himself and the bakery by obeying orders. But he could not betray Orym, not after the quiet friendship they had built. He stepped out fully, standing in front of the dragon, placing a hand on its scales. "You are not taking it," he said calmly. The officials hesitated, surprised by his determination. "It is not dangerous. It has never harmed anyone. It comes here every day for the bread and for trust," Marlowe added softly. Orym leaned slightly against him, its warm scales pressing reassuringly against his hand. The lead official narrowed her eyes. "We expected a weapon, a threat, something that could destroy. Instead we see, what? A calm creature?" she said. "You must understand, dragons are unpredictable. You risk the city's safety by protecting it." Marlowe shook his head. "You do not understand. Orym is not a threat. It is intelligent, patient, and kind. It can learn. It can understand humans. That is something more powerful than any weapon." The official looked around, noticing the people gathered along the streets, watching silently. Children peeked from windows, merchants stopped their work, and even guards who had accompanied her seemed uncertain. Marlowe realized that this was a moment not only for him and Orym but for the city itself. He needed to show them what trust and friendship could do. "Please," Marlowe said, raising his voice so the crowd could hear. "See it for yourselves. It does not attack. It does not steal. It comes here quietly, patiently, and waits. You can force it to fight, but if you do, you will only show what it is not. Watch it carefully. Learn from it. Sometimes strength is not in weapons or rules, it is in patience, understanding, and trust." Orym shifted slightly, lifting its head and gazing calmly at the officials. It made no threatening move, only a soft hiss that sounded almost like a greeting. Marlowe smiled, realizing that the dragon had chosen to support him, to trust him as much as he trusted it. The officials looked at each other, unsure what to do. They had come expecting a fight, but they were met with silence, understanding, and the quiet presence of a creature far wiser than they had imagined. The leader of the officials stepped closer, lowering her device slightly. "Perhaps we underestimated it," she muttered. "We saw only a dragon. We did not see patience, understanding, intelligence." The other officials nodded slowly. The city had taught Marlowe a lesson about fear, rules, and courage, but now the dragon was teaching the city a lesson of its own. Marlowe took a deep breath and spoke again. "This dragon trusts me. I trust it, and you can too if you choose. You do not have to use chains or nets. You can see what is possible when trust is stronger than fear." He glanced down at Orym. The dragon's eyes seemed to shine brighter, as if saying, "We can do this together." Marlowe smiled. The official sighed. "We cannot ignore rules entirely," she said. "But perhaps there is another way. If it continues to behave as you say without harming anyone, we may allow it to stay under observation." Relief washed over Marlowe. He nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you. You will see that it is not dangerous. It is remarkable." Orym nudged his hand gently, a small gesture of approval. The city watched in silence as the moment passed. People began whispering to each other, noticing that fear had been replaced by curiosity. Children waved at the dragon, and Orym responded with a small flick of its tail. The officials turned and walked away, leaving the bakery and its unusual visitor untouched. Marlowe closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. He looked down at Orym. "We did it," he said softly. The dragon pressed its warm head against his shoulder, a silent affirmation of trust and friendship. They had faced fear together and they had won, not with force but with patience, understanding, and courage. From that day on, Marlowe understood something important. Strength was not always shown by rules, weapons, or power. Sometimes it was shown by patience, trust, and the quiet courage to stand up for what was right. Orym had taught him this lesson, and together, they had shown the city that kindness and understanding could change hearts more than fear ever could. The morning routines continued, but now with a deeper meaning. Marlowe baked bread, telling stories to Orym while kneading dough. The dragon listened patiently, leaning against him, occasionally nudging small pieces of dough but never eating. Children came early to watch, and adults noticed the gentle bond between man and dragon. The city, slowly but surely, was learning the same lesson. Some friendships built on trust and care could overcome fear and suspicion, and even change the world in quiet, powerful ways. And as the sun rose over Leora, Marlowe knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges came next, he and Orym would face them together, not as owner and creature, but as friends who had chosen to trust each other completely, and in that trust, they had found a strength far greater than any city law could ever provide. The city of Leora slowly changed after that day. The streets were the same, the shops still opened at dawn, and the sound of carts rolled over stone roads like always. But something deeper had shifted. People no longer looked at Marlowe's bakery with fear. They looked with curiosity. And every morning when the golden dragon waited outside the door, no one screamed or ran away anymore. Orem still came at sunrise. It stood quietly, breathing in the smell of fresh bread, eyes half closed in peace. Marlowe opened the bakery door just as he always had. He smiled, not because he was no longer afraid, but because he had learned something important. Courage did not mean the fear was gone. It meant choosing kindness even when fear still existed. Children were the first to truly understand. They came early, holding their parents' hands, watching Orem with wide eyes. Some waved. Some whispered. One brave child stepped forward and placed a small wooden toy on the ground near the dragon. Orem lowered its head slowly, sniffed the toy, and gently pushed it back toward the child. The child laughed. That sound spread through the street like sunlight. Adults watched quietly. They noticed how careful the dragon was. How it never stepped where it could break something. How it waited patiently and never demanded. They noticed how Marlowe spoke to it like an equal, not as a master and not as prey. Slowly, fear turned into thought. Thought turned into understanding. Marlowe continued baking every day. He spoke while he worked, telling Orem about simple things. About how bread needed time to rise. About how fire could destroy but also warm and feed people if used with care. Orem listened, always calm. Sometimes it made a low, gentle sound, almost like agreement. Marlowe believed the dragon understood more than words. It understood feeling. One morning, city officials returned. This time they did not carry nets or devices. They carried notebooks. They watched quietly as Orem waited outside and Marlowe baked inside. They saw children approach without fear. They smelled the bread. One official spoke softly. "It does not act like a beast," he said. "It acts like a neighbor." Marlowe heard that and smiled. Weeks passed. Orem grew slightly larger but never less gentle. Its scales shone brighter and its eyes seemed deeper, full of thought. Marlowe realized that the dragon was learning from humans. It was learning patience, routine, and care. But humans were learning too. They were learning that not all strength was loud. Not all power burned. One evening after the bakery closed, Marlowe sat on the floor beside Orem. The dragon curled close, its warmth steady and calm. Marlowe rested his back against the counter. He felt tired but peaceful. "People think dragons and humans are different," he said softly. "But maybe we are not." Orem lifted its head and looked at him. "We both feel hunger," Marlowe continued. "Not just for food. For safety. For warmth. For belonging." He paused. "And we both choose what to do with our strength." Orem lowered its head again, resting it near Marlowe's knee. The next day something unexpected happened. A traveler arrived from a distant city. He saw Orem and reached for a weapon in fear. Before anyone could react, Orem stepped back instead of forward. It chose distance, not threat. Marlowe stepped between them calmly. "He spoke," he explained. And slowly the traveler lowered his weapon. That moment spread through the city like a quiet story. A dragon had chosen restraint. A human had chosen trust. No fire. No force. Just understanding. People began to talk differently about dragons. Not as monsters but as beings capable of choice. The bakery became a meeting place. People shared bread, stories, and questions. Orem remained nearby, always listening. Always calm. Marlowe understood then what made humans special in the galaxy. It was not weapons. It was not power. It was the ability to see another being and choose compassion instead of fear. Orem showed that dragons could do the same. One morning Orem did something new. After smelling the bread, it gently nudged a loaf with its nose, then pushed it back toward Marlowe. Marlowe laughed softly. "You're giving it back to me?" he asked. Orem flicked its tail once. Marlowe placed the loaf on the window for children to share. That small act changed everything. It showed the city that sharing was not taught with words alone. It was shown through action. Years later, people would speak of that bakery and that dragon. They would say it was where humans learned they were not small. Not because they ruled, but because they understood. And dragons learned that fire did not always need to burn. Sometimes it only needed to warm. Every morning the dragon still waited. Every morning the baker still baked. And in the simple smell of fresh bread, humans and dragons remembered what they shared. Patience. Trust. And the quiet strength to be kind.